at the side of the screen, and for Tom Sykes, that this will be one of those times where they're thinking, you know what, it's not the worst thing in the world not to be a World Superbike rider right now, because you're under an awful lot of pressure during a situation like this, a big delay, and now you've got that release because you have to suddenly get yourself ready for action again. You've got to build yourself up and get yourself fully psyched up. So it's a big challenge for everyone.
You say that, Steve, but the desire must be quite incredible, because Leon Haslam still coming back this season, a third round in 2022. He knows the bike isn't where it needs to be for him to challenge for points, and yet he still wants to come and still wants to line up and still wants to be on a grid and still wants to get the elbows out into turn one, battling for 15th place. You've got Tom Sykes, who wants to make his way back onto the grid for next season. So the desire to race and to ride certainly never goes away, does it?
I didn't say Tom didn't want to be a World Superbike rider. I just said he didn't want to be it right now. And for Lenny, like, Haslam is a rider that just loves it, and he'll race for as long as he possibly can during his career, and he'll be good and old whenever he finishes up racing, and certainly he'll expect to be in the British Championship for quite a few more years. And he's enjoyed this year being able to do the Endurance World Championship, to be able to rock up into the IDM, the German Championship, and get to the front of that field, to race here on the Petruccini bike as well. And you know, it's just been one of those things. He just loves being out there in the action. Tati
Mercado's commented to us previously as well that, you know, that competition of going to the German Championship, for example, where you can be one of the top dogs, or even the top dog, where you can go over there and be competitive at the front of the field again, almost tops up your energy supplies for the more difficult weekends. And Mercado's clearly had plenty of those in the World Championship in 2022.
Yeah, it has to, because it's a reminder that you're fast. You know, it's very difficult whenever you look at the timing screens and you're always looking to the second page of the results. You're always looking from the bottom up, and all of these riders are super talented. They're all very competitive, but you've got 26 riders in the field this weekend. Someone has to be first, but equally, someone has to be last, and you have to look for where your name's going to be. It's about having that realistic expectation about what the weekend can be, and that's where, for someone like Tati Mercado, you know, your expectation for what you can do in a World Superbike weekend is very different to what you can do whenever you're racing in the German Championship.
So pit lane opens, and at last we can build up to get underway with race one of this 2022 Pirelli Portuguese round. And there's sweet words to say and sweeter to hear that we are getting out onto track and on towards the grid. And a delay that it was unavoidable, of course, after an alarming crash in the Supersport 300 race this afternoon. And we had to wait for the medical helicopter to be back in position before we could start to think about going racing. But good to hear that the bike's warming up and making their way out onto track. So we're not too far away now from getting underway, and we'll certainly build you up through all of the riders on the grid. We'll remind you of some of the main stories that we've been talking about for the last hour and a half or so, and then we will go racing here this afternoon. It will be, just a reminder, a 14-lap race as opposed to the usual 20, so a 14-lap race here this afternoon. Still plenty of time for everyone to get their elbows out. It might make these early laps even more crucial.
I think it really will, and the run down to turn 1, turn 3, turn 5, that opening lap is always interesting, and I think especially in a shorter race duration that's the case. And we've seen a lot of times in the Super Pole race into turn 3 just how action-packed it can be, so everyone's going to be taking that approach during the course of this 2/3 race distance race.
Yes, turn 3 has always been something of a pinch point here in Portimao. The other place to watch out for on this opening lap, turn 5. Not quite such a dramatic area of the circuit, since we saw that ridge midway around the bend removed with resurfacing work in 2020, but still a place where the track drops away from you, where riders try to go in side by side but don't really fit, where we often see bikes skittering off towards the car circuit that runs the long way round the outside. So watch out for action there, that's for sure.
Well, that's the big thing. Even during the 300 race, myself and Dave were talking about it, down in towards turn 5, this is where you don't want to be on the outside of the track through here on lap 1, because you can be collected by someone else's mistake, and that's the big challenge. It's all about being in the right place at the right time in the opening laps. Sometimes being a little bit defensive can help you, sometimes it can hurt you because it then costs you on the run out of the corner. So it is a big challenge for the riders. Now you've got so many top class riders all on closely matched bikes, all trying to find that place out there to put themselves.
I think about Bas Bautista incidents and action around this circuit to know how close it can get when they try to go side by side.
Yeah, exactly, and we saw just how easy it is to trip over one another, and how easy it is to also get frustrated with another rider and just force a move. So it is something to keep an eye on through the course of the race.
So pit lane is open, will close in 2 minutes. The riders required to make their way through to the grid, and now a hive of activity. You wouldn't have believed that if you'd looked at the shot half an hour ago when it was completely empty. It looked like a scene out of a museum. Now it's much busier, and the usual WorldSBK community all in position to enjoy race 1, and 14 laps ahead of us to look forward to.
It's funny, actually. I talk a lot about how the riders keep themselves calm, and then they suddenly have to burst into action now whenever they get to the starting grid. And it's the same for everyone. You look at the mechanics, you look at the engineers, photographers, cameramen, whatever it is, everyone needs to suddenly kick into work mode, and it's amazing how quickly that switch does flick.
As we see the riders moving into position now on the grid. Andrea Locatelli will start from the middle of the second row. Alvaro Bautista will be just on his left, on the left of the picture, and now we're making our way through to the front row of the grid. So let's take a look at your starting grid and the riders who comprise it. Starting with your front row then, Jonathan Rea has qualified on pole position, and it is yet another pole position for Rea in 2022. He leads that particular metric. Alongside him, Toprak Razgatlioglu back on the front row of the grid. Only once this season has he been out of those top 3, and Alex Lowes completes row number 1. Here is Jonathan Rea, 67 points down on the championship leader coming into this race. That's a bigger margin even than the 61 points he recovered to take the title in 2019. Winless run, longer than it was at any stage that year. He hasn't won since we last visited Portugal in May. Remember, he made that margin up in less than 2 rounds 3 years ago. It's never quite over till it's over.
It's not over till it's over, but this is where he needs to make that stand. This is where a shorter race distance, 14 laps, becomes critical for Rea to really stamp his authority on Portimao.
Toprak Razgatlioglu lines up P2. 14 consecutive races for him in the points. He was 79 behind Alvaro Bautista at the start of that spell. He's been the top scorer over the course of the last 4 rounds. So in that period, he's made up 20 points on the Spaniard, and that gap now sits at 59.
Yeah, and at 59 points, Toprak knows that it's all about trying to just build that momentum for himself. The Yamaha has a better package than the Kawasaki. We saw that last season, particularly in the second half of the year. So for him, he needs to make sure he's able to keep himself in the scrap.
It's Alex Lowes here with the FIM president, Jorge Villegas. Lowes completing row number 1, the number 22, who scored his 2nd podium of the season at the Superpole race in Barcelona a fortnight ago. Only scored 9 points in the 2 feature-length races, though, so he remains down in 7th place overall. This is his first visit to Portimao since 2020, of course. He missed the 2021 Portuguese round due to a right wrist injury.
Yeah, and he's been in very relaxed form all the way through this weekend. Says that the bike feels good. Spent a lot of time focused on his longer runs and older tyres yesterday, so he's going to hope that that's going to stand him in good stead today. But 45 degrees track temperature is going to be tough for all these riders out there.
Second row of the grid, Alvaro Bautista, Andrea Locatelli and Axel Bassani. Bautista, the championship leader and certainly the most consistent man in this 2022 title race. He's won at 7 of the 8 tracks we've visited. Incidentally, Toprak won the last title with an average of 43 points per round. Bautista has managed to average 49 points this season so far, and he's scored 80% of the points available. Bautista in devastating mood.
Yeah, it has been super impressive all the way through. He hasn't made mistakes, and that's been the key thing for him. He's been just consistent, and he's learned the lessons from 2019.
Bautista then lines up on row 2 as we see FIM President Villegas making his way backwards through the grid. Andrea Locatelli will line up alongside Alvaro Bautista, the middle of that second row. And on the outside of the second row, Axel Bassani. There was some drama in the Superpole session earlier on today. Several riders had their laps initially cancelled as a result of a yellow flag, or alleged a yellow flag infringement that in the end was rescinded, and that changed the pecking order around between the end of that session and then the starting grid that we see now. This is Andrea Locatelli then starting P5. Of course, he was a podium finisher here last season. He's only scored 1 podium since our last visit to Portimao. 18 races now without a top 3 return, and actually that's longer than he ever went during his rookie campaign without a podium. He scored just 7 points last time out in Barcelona. Really has been a tough recent run for him.
The game's moved on this year as well, and Locatelli, it's now up to him to make that next step for him as an established superbike rider, and to see if he's able to get himself back into contention. Middle of the second row of the grid, and a really strong effort in Catalonian qualifying as well. That's positive for him, and it's just about trying to come away with those big points-paying positions. He's still 5th in the World Championship, so even though he hasn't had the best run of form, overall this season he's still meeting the expectations Yamaha would have had for him.
5th pole position of the season for Jonathan Rea, and remember, this is only the 9th round in, also his 5th pole here in Portimao. That's a record at this venue. Axel Bassani completes your second row of the grid. He scored 19 points last time out in Catalonia. That was actually his lowest score since Estoril, but that probably emphasises how high the level of expectation has now risen for Bassani. 8 top 5 finishes in the last 5 rounds for the Italian. He sits 6th in the championship. Remember, he was 9th overall last year, has made another strong step forward in 2022. So your second row of the grid, Alvaro Bautista, Andrea Locatelli and Axel Bassani. Row number 3 for Loris Baz, Scott Redding and Michael Ruben Rinaldi. The first of the BMW men is Loris Baz, and he's something of a track specialist here in Portimao. Secured his 20th and most recent Superbike podium here last season. In fact, he's been on the rostrum 3 times in his last 5 races. This afternoon, his 50th start on BMW machinery, and I think we can hear from him now.
Let's grab a quick word with Loris Baz. Loris, a good effort in Superpole earlier on. BMW rising back towards the front.
Yeah, it's been a tough weekend again for us. We had an issue since yesterday morning and we could not find really what was the problem, and we found out at the end of FP3, so it was a bit late. But then, yeah, found my bike again in the Superpole. Was just hard to be back in the right pace in 3 laps. But yeah, we did a good job. I took the guys in front, tried to have a good slipstream, so it was a great lap. We'll see for the race. We didn't do with the Prime. We had a really long stint of things, but I feel comfortable. I love this place, and it's always great racing. So let's see what we can do.
Let's see what you can do. Good luck.
Thank you very much.
On the third row of the grid, we've got Loris Baz, Scott Redding and Michael Ruben Rinaldi. Redding, who scored 35 points in Magny-Cours earlier on in this season. It was back to earth with a bit of a bump at the Catalonia round because he only managed 2. That his worst weekend since Aragon, with a couple of crashes in the feature-length races. And completing the third row of the grid, Michael Ruben Rinaldi. Now, Rinaldi's managed podium finishes in the last 2 rounds. France, race 2 at Magny-Cours, and race 2 at Barcelona as well, actually. And those back-to-back podiums, that's the first time, by my reckoning, in his Superbike career that he's managed podiums in 2 consecutive rounds. So Rinaldi showing some more consistency this season as a whole than he has in the past, and he's averaged 26 points per round in 2022 compared to 22 points per round this time last year. So Rinaldi with that step forward. Fourth row of the grid for Iker Lecuona, Garrett Gerloff and Philip Ertl. Lecuona, the pole sitter last time out, finds himself in a more modest grid slot this time around, but certainly was back to form a fortnight ago. Has been a miserable recent run for him, and the Catalonia round, his best scoring since Misano, even if that 6th place was the most that he could manage. He has raced here in MotoGP, tested here in February, so set up well for his 25th Superbike start this afternoon. Alongside him on row number 4 will be Garrett Gerloff and Philip Ertl. 447 days between podiums for the Texan. He was back on the rostrum at last at the Catalonia round. 3rd place for him in race 1, and still a third of the season for him to impress before he moves on to BMW machinery next year. And GRT certainly lined up some quite capable replacements over the last month or so. Philip Ertl completes that 4th row of the grid. 13 points on Sunday in Barcelona for him. 6th place in the Superpole race, his best result yet. Followed that up with 7th in the afternoon. So that's 4 top 10 finishes in the last 3 rounds. Ertl certainly beginning to look at home in his rookie Superbike season. Row number 5, Xavi Vierge, Roberto Tamburini and Luca Myers. Vierge, who gradually improved over the weekend of his home round in Catalonia, scored a 6th place in race 2, and that's his best performance in 4 rounds. Defending 10th overall in the championship from Garrett Gerloff and Loris Baz, and Vierge a couple of places behind teammate Iker Lecuona overall.
Yeah, and certainly for the Honda riders, for Vierge, this is an opportunity to be able to come away with something that's a track that he knows well from winter testing. That plays into a stronger weekend than what we've seen in a few of the recent rounds with Honda.
We can continue to scamper through the grid. We're on row number 5 now with Xavi Vierge, alongside him Roberto Tamburini and Luca Maias. Final appearance of the season this weekend for Tamburini. Moto X will be sitting out the flyaway rounds, but Tamburini making his case for 2023. Couple of scoring results at Catalonia last time out, his first top 10 finish included, and he scored 34 points this season. That puts him ahead of the likes of Nazane, Bernardi, Laverty, so a decent effort from him. This is Luca Maias, and Maias finds himself completing that 5th row of the grid. And as you can see here, the Frenchman scored points in each of the last 8 feature-length races, so he'll be looking for more today. A couple of top 10 finishes in that spell as well. He's 4 places higher in the championship than he finished last year, 47 points in 2022, and that's despite missing 4 races, so already a better score than his 44 points from last year that matches his rider number.
You can see Paul Denning, their team manager for Yamaha, down there just psyching up his rider, Toprak Razgadioglu. Toprak doesn't usually tend to need too much encouragement to go for it at the start of a race, but he's got that little bit of extra encouragement from PD.
Row number 6 with Jake Gagne, Eugene Laverty and Kota Nazane. Gagne, the 2022 Moto America Superbike champion, in as a wild card with his domestic Attack Racing Yamaha team. This is going to be his 30th Superbike World Championship start. Rode in the latter stages of 2017 and the full 2018 season with the official Honda team.
Yeah, half a second slower than Gerloff in the Super Pole session, faster than Lozane, so not a bad performance by Gagne in the Super Pole session to lead off the 6th row.
Real home round this for Eugene Laverty. He lives in the Algarve, but this is also a circuit where he does excel. Twice a race winner here. Portuguese round was his top scoring weekend in 2021. He picked up 3 top 10 finishes.
Yeah, there's a lot of support here for him as well, from whether it's from home or from Alvo or down the road. So this is certainly at the home round for Norge, and good opportunity for him as well to score some points in the BMW.
Kota Nazane in the news over this last week or so. He's set for a fresh start in 2023, a full-time move to Moto 2. Actually made his debut in the World Championship, aged just 16 as a wildcard. Something of a surprise move because he struggled in 2022. This time last year he had more than double the points that he has now. Luca Bernardi will line up on row 7 alongside Michael van der Mark and Hafiz Shireen. Bernardi making his first visit with WorldSBK to Portimao since 2018. Back then he was still riding Supersport 300. So it's been a pretty fast rise for him. But Barney have decided the top flight was one step too soon. He's going to move back to Supersport for the end of season flyaways. And Xavi Forés will come in to replace him for the rest of 2022.
Yeah, Bernardi, super competitive rider in the Supersport class last year. He's going to be back in action in that for the last 3 rounds of the campaign. And it'd be interesting to see what he's learned from being on the Superbike to then stepping back to the 600 machine.
5 minutes remain until we go racing. Let's head down to the grid with Dave Goddard.
Yes, here with Phil Marron, Toprak's crew chief. Phil, it's getting a bit breezy down here on the grid, I have to say. Is that going to be a major effect on the riders?
At the minute, it's quite similar to FP2. So Toprak did comment by the end of FP2, the bike was a bit more unstable coming over the blind crest. But it was 180 degrees to the direction we're seeing at the minute, so for sure it's going to change compared to what we had yesterday. Just makes the bike a bit more of a handful.
Well, let's hope it's not too much of a handful for him. Best of luck.
Thank you very much.
Well, thankfully it's not a scene from Twister because the helicopters managed to come in and land, and that's good news because that confirms that we are on target to get underway with racing as planned. We continue on through the grid. We just saw Luca Bernardi. This, of course, is Michael van der Mark, and van der Mark here will be starting from 20th position. He provided BMW's first victory in 8 years here last season. It was the Superpole race and a win for him. No sign of the kind of tricky conditions that helped him to that success, though. So this is going to be a challenge. But remember, he's only been back from injury for a couple of rounds, looking to get back into the top 10 here.
Yeah, and I think if you're able to do something like that for van der Mark, it's going to be a big stretch. But scoring points has to be the goal for him. It's all about building up so that by the time we get ready for winter testing, that he's fully fit, ready for action, and able to show what he can do next season, because that's what the goal has to be. It's been such an injury-ravaged season, and big injuries for him to deal with as well.
Hafiz Shireen it is who completes that 7th row of the grid, back in action for the first time since Manicourt after illness forced his withdrawal from the Catalonia round at late notice. Row 8, Haslam, Fritz, Mercado, and row 9, Ponsant and Koenig rounds out your 26 runners and riders for race 1 this afternoon. Alvaro Bautista has led the 2022 World Championship since